Welcome to Solo Selling with Trevor White, and today I'm going to talk about food. Bloke food for voyaging. So, I wouldn't say that I'm much of a food connoisseur. I tend to think of food as fuel. I buy it with the intent that I'm going to consume it, and I don't have any real desire to make anything exotic, although I do appreciate good food. And I would like to be a better cook, and I can make basic and rudimentary meals. I tend to like things like stir fries and roasts and pastas. Easy sailing food generally. However, I've been spending a bit of time thinking about food that lasts a long time. I've just sailed from New Zealand up to Vanuatu. It's almost 2 months since I stocked the boat in New Zealand, and I was going through the food lockers. Got a brother turning up soon, so I'm restocking the boat. And, I went through and I found I've still got a pumpkin that I bought in Whangarei nearly 2 months ago. It's in perfect, healthy condition. It's a traditional-looking pumpkin. There's a little bit of bruising on it, but it's in pretty good shape. I've got a bag of potatoes in there that maybe 10% of the bag left, and they're in good shape. And it made me think, what are the best foods for voyaging, and how do you get them to last longer? And certainly I'm no expert, but I'm just going through some of my observations and my thoughts on food for voyaging and maybe food for blokes. Because let's face it, most of us aren't gourmets. And I was chatting to another mate on a boat, sitting around having a couple of beers the other night, and his go-to is chili beans and wraps. And to be honest, I can do that. That works for me as well. Quite common to have quesadillas, like a wrap with cheese and something else in it, and quick, easy, filling, and I'm done. And but recently I had 3 crew on the boat, and 2 girls and a French guy, and they were all pretty good cooks, and they all liked eating. And when you got crew, that's the one thing that they're thinking about all day long is food, because it's the one thing you can change in your routine is what you eat, and it's important for a voyage, particularly if you've got crew, is food. When I'm sailing by myself, I don't really even give it much of a thought. I might cook one meal a day. I will generally have bacon and eggs in the morning. That's my sort of go-to food. Or I'll have scrambled eggs with a bit of cheese, a bit of chilli. Simple. Lunch, I may not even eat it most of the time. And then dinner, I try and cook something. But again, it'll depend on the weather and how I feel, if I'm even hungry. But getting back to food and what my observations on what has lasted long. So I stocked up the boat with a considerable amount of food, fresh fruit and veggies. Try to put as much fresh fruit and veg on the boat as I can. And we did, quite a big shop in Whangarei. And it's a good place to provision a boat if you're heading up into the islands. It's up in the Whangarei town basin. You can get a berth there, and there's a large supermarket, Pack and Save, across the road. It's only maybe 100 metres away, so it's very easy to provision. And I reflected on previous voyages and what had worked and what hadn't worked. So I stocked up on things like a big bag of potatoes. I had maybe 20 kilo bag of potatoes, and I take brushed potatoes, so they're still dirty. And I learnt this when I was a kid. My father grew up on potato farms, and he always told me, if you want potatoes to last, get the dirty potatoes, ones that still got dirt on them. And I don't know why it is that they don't go off as quickly, but they don't. And if you get a bit of air around them, they tend to last even longer. So a big bag of dirty potatoes will last a couple of months on a boat. And a boat is quite a hot, humid environment. There's not a lot of air getting through the lockers, and I can smell the potatoes. There might be 1 or 2 bad ones in there, and I need to go through and throw some out. But it's been nearly 2 months, and those potatoes are still in good shape. The pumpkin is the next one, so I tend to get the bigger, older, traditional round-style pumpkins, and they, probably because they've got a thick skin on them, they tend to last quite well. And I've got a pumpkin in there which I need to chop up and roast. And it's still in perfect condition. The other thing I purchased was cabbage. So I'm not a huge fan of cabbage, and I was thinking I'd just chop it up and throw it in soups or put it in salads or maybe even a stew or something like that. But because I had a couple of girls on board, it was turned into a whole range of things. So lots of interesting salads, And cabbage, was a bit of a hit. It was used in a lot of different dishes. So if I was doing it again, I would probably grab a couple of cabbages again. And they're quite filling. They last really well. They get a few bad patches on the outside. Just peel those leaves off, and inside will be in generally pretty good condition. So the other one was carrots, and I found that if you get carrots, chop them up and then put them in water. And I didn't invent this, I just read about it somewhere, and we did it on the boat. But you put the carrots in water, it insulates them from the air, the environment, and they last a lot longer. So you can put them in the hold, or you can put them in the fridge. In our case, we just chopped them up, put them in the fridge. And down the bottom of the fridge, I've got a couple of bags of garlic, which is fresh garlic, but it's in a sealed vacuum packed bag, and that's holding up pretty well in the fridge. I also find cheese holds up really well. So I tend to buy a fair bit of cheese and butter before I leave, and if I've got room in the freezer, I throw it in the freezer. And cheese and butter goes really well in the freezer. It's frozen. So I do stock up the freezer as much as I can with fresh meat and fresh butter, fresh bacon, all those things that are not always readily available in the islands. And I've still got quite a bit of fresh butter and bacon in the fridge, or rather in the freezer. The things that don't last terribly long, bananas. Bananas always go off. I mean, you really need to buy them with the intent that you're going to get maybe 5 days, and then separate them around the boat. Get some green ones, get some riper ones, but they'll go off very quickly. The same with a lot of other fruits. Your lemons and your oranges. Oranges tend to last maybe a week, maybe 2 if you're lucky, but they will all go off pretty quickly. And I find if you can buy fruit and veggies from a farmer's market where it hasn't been refrigerated and it hasn't been stored, it will last longer. If it comes out of a supermarket, there's a good chance that has been refrigerated, stored, frozen, shipped, held in storage in a oxygen-free environment, and God knows what else they do to it. Anything coming out of a supermarket won't last very long. So the best place to get your fruit and veg is from a farmer's market where it's fresh. And again, that means buying seasonal food. Even up here in the islands, I buy a lot of paws and pineapples and bananas. And if you can buy bananas on the stalk, like a whole stalk of them, they will last a lot longer. And just chop them off as they become as they become ripe, and they will continue to ripen over a period of time, but they will last a lot longer if they're on that stalk, as opposed to buying a hand of bananas. Things like pawpaws, if you can buy them really unripe, and then they'll last a little longer. But it's interesting, buying fruit and veg and what lasts and what doesn't. The other thing I tend to have a lot of is wraps. So I buy those by the dozen, and I throw them in the bottom of the boat. They're sealed, they're vacuum packed, and they last a long time. It's a type of flatbread. It doesn't. I don't think it really makes any difference if it's flatbread or it's a Mexican style cornbread. They all tend to last a long time, and they're easy to use in a variety of things, from toasted for dipping to wrapping your breakfast burrito in, to putting a bit of meat in with a bit of cheese, and you've got a simple wrap. But wraps are brilliant for sailing, and they're so handy. And again, they're not terribly expensive for what you get. But normal bread lasts maybe 3 days, and then it's gone mouldy and it's going off. If you can buy a type of hard, like a German hard bread, a rye or something like that, you might get 2 weeks out of it if it's fresh from a baker and it's made really well. I've had them last up to about 2 weeks. Not everybody likes it, but it does last a lot longer. I don't tend to eat a lot of bread myself, but I enjoy making it. So on a voyage, we always bake bread. You just use a simple recipe. We buy baker's flour and we bake bread, and it's always a hit. Everybody loves the smell of fresh bread in the boat. It keeps people interested. You pull it out of the oven, you start chopping it up, and people love it. So I would always recommend, if you've got crew on board, to go to the trouble of baking bread if you've got an oven that can do it, and it's always going to be a hit. So what to buy? I mean, I would love to hear from other people, their thoughts on food. There are so many people out there who are experts on it. I mean, one of the things I would like to be able to do is preserve more foods and store those in the boat. And I'm I'm not an expert at it. My mum used to do a lot of preserving when I was younger. It's a bit difficult on a boat because your boats are moving, and glass and boats don't always work that well together. You've got to really protect glass vessels. I like the idea of the vacuum packs. I mean, I vacuum pack a lot of stuff and put it on a bike, vacuum packed, and then put it on the boat. It tends to last longer that way. But yeah, I'm certainly interested in trying to preserve things, and I've been reading a lot more about preserving butter in oil and storing it in the bilge, and preserving meat in oil and put in the bilge. But there's also downsides. Like you can end up with botulism and other things if you're not careful and you're not your preparation's not perfect. It can cause problems if you don't know what you're doing and you haven't done the research. But people have been doing this for thousands of years. We tend to buy a lot of dried fruit and dried nuts, or rather nuts in general, and they're always good. They're good nibblies on a voyage, and they last really well. Problem is, as we sail around, most places don't want you bringing in nuts, and they certainly don't want fresh produce coming into the country. If you're coming into Australia or New Zealand, you don't want to arrive there with any fresh food or nuts or seeds, because it's all going to get taken. So you've got to be careful on how much food you have on board, and even in New Zealand, like if you've got meat in the freezer, even cooked meat, they will confiscate it and take it from you. So that makes it difficult if you're trying to store food on your boat. Like you want to be able to fill your boat up with produce where it's cheap, and then carry it along on a voyage. But countries becoming far harder, and sometimes it's difficult to buy what you need when you return up at a country. I mean, I find the islands not so bad because they realise there's a limited amount of food around, and so they don't tend to take everything from cruises. But countries like Australia and New Zealand are ruthless. They'll go through your boat, they'll clean out everything. I understand the biosecurity risk, and some of it's very warranted. Other times I think it's just ridiculous. But I understand. They take no prisoner sort of approach. But it gets expensive. Like if you've got meat on board and they come through and they take several $100s worth of meat out of your freezer, that hurts. It hurts a lot. And then they take all your cooking ingredients. Again, it's frustrating. You've got seeds and nuts and things like that. It gets expensive. It's expensive very, very quickly. Because produce is not cheap anymore, and it's even more expensive in a lot of these Western countries. And in some of the island countries, you just can't buy some of these things as well, which is frustrating. It is difficult, but it's also interesting. Like you're trying to get food on board which will last for as long as possible, so that when you're up in the islands, you've bought produce as cheaply as possible in somewhere like New Zealand or Australia, and then you're up in the island and you continue to consume that produce where the things you like are not readily available. Yeah, that's what we all try and do. It's not always easy. I mean, I tend to buy a lot of local when I come to the islands. I still buy meat, and I'm trying to fish as much as possible, not always successfully, but I tend to buy a lot of local produce. So lots of leafy greens, lots of up here in Vanuatu, there's a lot of bok choy. There's lots of fruit, so pineapples and papayas, grapefruit, bananas. All of that is super plentiful. And every island you go to will have a market at least once a week where you can buy produce. But when you go to some of these smaller islands, in some cases they don't even have a local store, and they're asking you for produce. Like they've run out of oil, or they've run out of rice, and sometimes it might be a little bit of a white lie because you're the wealthy boat. In other cases, it's true. Like the resupply boat couldn't turn up because of bad weather, and they're running low on produce themselves. I mean, they'll always survive because they have plentiful gardens. It's one of the things that I love about the islands is the garden nature. And if they didn't have gardens and they couldn't fish, well, they would starve to death. And that's what has allowed people to exist in these islands for thousands of years is their ability to grow their own produce and be able to live off that produce. But in lean seasons, where there's droughts or where there's storms, their gardens can get wiped. So I always tend to carry quite a bit of rice on board, and I carry some sugar and other things that they want. I mean, yes, sugar is the big no-no these days, but these people still want it, and it's not like they're obese as in our Western nations. The small amount of sugar they're going to consume is negligible. But I understand why they want it. Oil is another one, and that surprises me because, I find that in all the places I visit, they have coconut plantations, and they can make coconut oil, which is incredibly healthy, from their coconuts. But, like everybody, they get lazy and they want to, get ready-made oil. But the problem is the oil they're getting is just garbage. It's these cheap, shitty canola oil or palm oil out of Malaysia. They buy it in 20-litre drums. And, I wouldn't even put that shit in my engine. It's almost toxic. And that's the oil that these people are moving towards because they perceive that it is better for you. When, most people from Western nations are moving back towards, good quality olive oil or coconut oil because it's healthier for you and has less toxins. So yeah, it's interesting as we travel around and what people perceive and what they're marketed to by companies, and like a lot of these smaller nations are being heavily marketed to by different companies, Coca-Cola and things like that. And sometimes it's very cheap, and they're just pushing it into these countries. But anyway, that's my little rant on food. So if you've got any tips on how you get food to last longer, I'd be keen to hear. And thanks for joining me. Safe sailing. See you out there.